The YouTube and the Instagram algorithm, it does not distinguish between accuracy of information. It only looks at what is capturing the greatest amount of raw attention in terms of clicks and in terms of viewing duration. What's up guys, Sean Nalawani, RealScienceAthletics.com, and today I'm going to be responding to a recent video from Alexander Leonidas, better known as AlphaDestiny, and the video is entitled Strength Training for Size, It Makes Sense, where he gives some general advice regarding strength and hypertrophy training and the relationship between the two. So let's go through this video and I'm going to give you my thoughts and my perspective on the points that he makes. Okay, do I personally agree or disagree? Alex has been around the YouTube fitness scene for a lot of years now, and his videos do reach a fairly wide audience, and so I think that this is a good subject to cover, and there's some really important stuff in here that a lot of you probably need to hear, so I would suggest watching this video all the way through. And just as a side note, I've sped up the clips from his video by 25% just to make this a bit shorter overall. So let's jump into it.
If your main goal is to build lots of muscle and look massive, I still think that pursuing strength training makes a lot of sense. Let me explain why right now. So the first thing I'll say is that progressive overload is absolutely key. I don't care how much you focus on my muscle connection, TUT, and optimal volume. If progression is not taking place over time, you'll likely not grow.
So I don't think it's any surprise to those who follow my channel that I would definitely agree with those statements. I'd go as far as to say that a muscle building program is a strength training program at heart because you ultimately can't separate them. Keep in mind that strength doesn't just mean how much maximal weight you can lift in a very low rep range, okay? Even if you go from lifting a lighter weight for 19 reps up to 20 reps, that's still an increase in strength. If you go from doing a small isolation exercise like a lateral raise with 10 kilogram dumbbells up to 12.5 kilogram dumbbells, that is an increase in strength. If you can lift a given weight in a more mechanically challenging position than you did last time, or use a slower negative or implement a pause, that is also an increase in strength. And these are all forms of progressive overload. And as Alex said, progressive overload is key for growth. And I'd go even further to say that if you don't progress, it's not just likely that you won't grow, you literally won't grow. There has to be some form of progressive stimulus on the muscle over time in order to create new adaptations, even if it's just something as small as an extra half rep or an extra 1 second pause or 1 more pound on the bar. But bottom line, if you are training for muscle growth, then you're also training for strength by default.
Fact is, there needs to be some objective metric to know that we're actually making progress, not just spinning our wheels, which is all too common nowadays, because you can't separate size and strength, even though a lot of marketers will tell you otherwise. Allow me to simplify it like this. If your numbers are going down, you're probably losing muscle mass. If your numbers are maintaining, you're probably not gaining any additional size. And if they're improving, say taking your bench from 185 to 275, you probably gain a good amount of size.
So there's no doubt about that. And one way that I've put it before is that your training logbook essentially represents your levels of muscle mass, but in mathematical form. It's like the numbers in those logs are directly correlated to your existing muscular capacity. And assuming that your form and your technique is on point and that it's being kept consistent, then if the numbers here are steadily going up, you're performing more work over time in some capacity, then your levels of muscle mass are also going to be steadily going up and vice versa. Now, that doesn't mean that the correlation is going to be exactly the same for everyone. Genetics do play a role here, and not everybody who can, say, dumbbell press 100s for 6 reps is going to have the exact same chest size, okay? I'm just talking relative to you as an individual.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter what we're feeling, nor does the mirror make a difference in this case, because we already know that building muscle as a natural is a slow process. Look at those muscle gaining calculators. Every year, it gets slower and slower. So it's not like every 2 months you're gonna say, oh my God, I gained 0.5 inches on my biceps. I mean, it could happen, but after a certain point, that progression is slowed down. The visual progression is what I'm talking about here, whereas strength can still occur far more rapidly depending what exercise you're performing.
Right, and this is why I've been repeating pretty much a broken record for the past decade that as a natural lifter, tracking your lifts is so important because like Alex is talking about here, once you're past the newbie gain phase, muscle growth is going to be happening so slowly that it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for you to measure it just by looking at yourself in the mirror or even by taking objective measurements. You can't just perform a few workouts for a few weeks and then check visually to see if it's working. On the other hand, strength gains are going to be measurable in the short term. Unless you're really advanced, then they're usually going to be measurable on a workout to workout basis. And since size and strength are so closely intertwined, that's how you know that what you're doing is working. You don't need visual confirmation. If you come back to the gym and you're able to do slightly more than last time in whatever capacity, it can just be a very small improvement, that is your evidence right there that you are in fact building new muscle, even though it's not going to be visually perceptible yet. The strength gain is what confirms that for you. And the muscle gain will become visually perceptible, but just over a longer term period as those small increases in strength accumulate. I'm not saying you can't make gains without tracking your workouts objectively, but it's just going to be a much more efficient process if you do.
And that's what makes a difference long-term, motivation-wise, since the gains are so freaking slow, and size-wise. You can't tell me that a guy who improves his numbers by a significant margin is not going to look bigger. It can't happen. It won't happen.
Yeah, the only people who really claim that adding significant weight to the bar over time won't also add significant muscle to your frame over time are the people who either don't know what they're talking about, or they're the people who are trying to sell you some sort of gimmick. But no experienced natural lifter who has actually built a solid physique, they're not going to doubt that.
Everybody scatters weight differently, and there is genetics to consider, but still, if I take your strict curl from 95 pounds to 135 pounds, you don't have to second guess. You don't have to pull out the measuring tape. The objective numbers prove to you that you gain muscle, and you know that you're gaining size because progressive overload, whether it's evidence of hypertrophy or the actual driver itself, doesn't matter. We got to induce it to a certain extent.
So I have seen this question come up before. Is progressive overload the result of hypertrophy, or is it the driver of hypertrophy? And I would say that it's not one or the other. It's actually both. It's both the result and it's also the driver. If you barbell row 200 pounds for 8 reps, and then you come back to the gym next time and you barbell row 200 pounds for 9 reps, the fact that you were capable of increasing to 9 reps, that is the result of the previous workout. It's the evidence that muscle growth has taken place between then and now. And then the fact that you actually physically executed those 9 reps, it's also the stimulus that's then going to allow you to do 10 reps the next time. So I just see it as this never-ending feedback loop.
So anyway, another point I want to stress is that with strength training, you're always focusing on the fundamentals, the exercise that have stood the test of time for the most part. The squat, bench press, deadlift, barbell row, overhead press, weighted pull-up, weighted dip, the big heavy compounds, the barbell curls as well, your barbell extension. It's classic stuff that can be done with straight weight and dumbbells, and then the variations that those entail, whether it be by changing the angles, like doing an incline bench or a floor press, or even modifying the strength curve. Regardless, they're all exercises that work and will absolutely not fail you. It's not something that you just created at the top of your head. It's not some gimmicky movement that some marketer is trying to sell you.
So it's always good to see somebody else hammering the same point as well. I've been talking a lot about this in my videos lately. So most of you already know my stance on this, which is the fact that as a natural lifter, your program should be centered around the basic proven compound lifts first and foremost. Sure, you could still make gains doing nothing but isolation movements if you really wanted to for some reason. You could still make chest gains by doing reverse grip twisting cable presses while lying on a Bosu ball.
Oh, it's a deep burn. Oh, it's so deep.
But it's not going to be optimal, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So many of these new and innovative improved lifts that you see plastered all over YouTube and all over Instagram, they're really just marketing fluff at the end of the day. The basics are not very sexy, they don't sell very well, and so people just have to keep coming up with this endless novel content to really get the clicks and the views and the attention. And most of the people showing this stuff in their Instagram swipe workouts or their top 6 rear delt exercises you must do, or your shoulders will shrivel up and fall onto the gym floor and your girlfriend will cheat on you with the front desk guy. Those guys probably never even did this stuff to build most of their muscle mass, and they probably don't even do most of it now.
Now that said, my argument is not that these new movements are bad. In fact, some of them are quite genius and I would absolutely recommend them. Rather, it's all about simplifying the process. And we know that the basics work, so why not just rely on that?
Now, I'm glad that Alex brought that up because that's a point that I wanted to clarify as well. Some people might see my content where I really hammer the basic fundamentals and they think that I'm saying that you should only ever do classical lifts and any modified version or any attempt to improve on them at all is just complete blasphemy and a total gimmick. But that's really not what I'm saying. My emphasis on the basics is more so a pushback against all of this endless BS fluff content that we're seeing more and more of nowadays that's trying to swing the pendulum all the way to the extreme and act like the basic lifts are outdated or that they don't work or that the weight on the bar doesn't matter and you need a million different fancy mind-muscle connection exercises if you want to make gains. What I'm trying to do is bring people back here into a more reasonable middle ground. I'm not trying to send them all the way off over here and claim that everything is set in stone forever and that there's no way you could ever improve on anything. And that middle ground means that yes, you can experiment with different exercise variations here and there. You can take your own individual body structure and find ways of performing certain lifts that feels best for you. Of course, we should always strive for improvement and strive to optimize our training and find ways to advance the general pool of training knowledge further. But the central point is just that the basic fundamental compound lifts with a focus on progressive overload, that should still form the underlying foundation of your training. You absolutely cannot and will not go wrong with that.
Some guys will tell you that the basics don't work, that you're wasting your time, that this is a better way. And that advice might have good intentions in some cases, but it often confuses lifters and leads them down a path where they're really not growing at all because they're not getting stronger at the fundamentals. A lot of guys don't have a foundation, and if they do, they're wasting their time on movements that are far less efficient or exercise that haven't quite stood the test of time yet. The basics work, and they won't fail you, all right? And strength training is all about that. Because let's keep it real, there's only so many ways that you can curl or press.
Yeah, that's the thing too. It's like, even if there is some room for little tweaks and small improvements on certain exercises, there's still going to be a pretty limited window in terms of how much you can realistically modify a given movement and how much benefit that's actually going to give you in the real world. For example, if you take a small muscle group like your biceps with a pretty straightforward function, if you've got all of your basic compound back training in place that you're getting steadily stronger at, especially on things like weighted pull-ups, and you're doing a couple of different curling variations during the week that feel comfortable for you, full range of motion, solid technique without excessive use of momentum, you're engaging the biceps and you're applying steady progressive overload. With that right there, you've done the vast majority of what you need to do and of what is even possible to maximize your biceps growth. And any extra little form tweaks and pinky twists and cable attachment choices, at best, that's only going to make a small difference.
And I think that following a structured routine that's been systematically designed to improve your performance makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, what allows us to remain consistent and maximize progressive overload is always going to be a great option. I'd much rather you run something like that compared to a program that was written by some gym bro who's probably taking a bunch of roids as well. Because these dudes just up the dose, they use the highest volume of which they can handle, they run a basic bro split and they fluff and pump it and they just get massive. And when real naturals try to train like that, they often experience all kinds of plateaus.
Keep in mind that generally speaking, the fitness influencers who get the most views and the most attention generally are going to be the ones with the most impressive physiques. That's what allows them to rise all the way up to the very top. It's not based on who gives the most accurate information, since most of the people who are consuming this content, they don't even know what's accurate and what's not in the first place. That's why they're searching for the information to begin with. And the YouTube and the Instagram algorithm, it does not distinguish between accuracy of information. It only looks at what is capturing the greatest amount of raw attention in terms of clicks and in terms of viewing duration. And if you're going to have a top 0.0001% physique, that also means that in most cases, you either have elite genetics or you're enhanced, or very often a combination of both. And it's not that there aren't genetically elite enhanced lifters out there who are also very knowledgeable. Okay, there definitely are, but very often that is not the case, because most of the guys who fall into that category are going to get great results regardless of how they train.
Now it's just objective progress. You're either getting better performance-wise or you're not. And if you ain't, you got to ask why, and that's when we dial things in further. You become a much smarter lifter in this way. You can look at those papers. You can look at those workout logs. You see it.
Like we talked about earlier, muscle growth happens very slowly, whereas strength can be tracked accurately in the short term. And so not only do consistent strength gains mean that your muscle building efforts are on the right track, but it's also going to be a way to identify if your program isn't working so that you can make the appropriate adjustments. If you're just relying on the mirror or on your measurements, then it could take months before you wake up and realize that you're not actually making any gains. Whereas if you're tracking your strength progress in an objective way, then if you're not making any gains, you're going to be able to see it very quickly in just a matter of a few weeks. Just think about how much time and effort that could potentially save you. Do you really want to train for 3 or 4 months straight or more and then realize that your program isn't working, when instead you could just keep workout logs and within maybe 3 weeks or less, you could come to the same realization and get yourself onto the proper track? I think the answer is pretty obvious there.
You know what? We're committed to this. We're going to be in this game for life. So we might as well do it right instead of just spinning our wheels all the time, which I'm not in favor of.
So I think that was a great video by Alex, just generally summarizing some of the key overarching principles behind effective hypertrophy training for natural lifters. There's just so much bullshit out there in the fitness industry nowadays. Fake natties, natural lifters who are on TRT, and outright genetically elite enhanced bodybuilders who really just have no clue how to coach natural lifters, who don't even understand very basic training principles. And unfortunately, this is going to lead a lot of people down the wrong path. So I'm always happy to see videos like this from legit naturals who actually know what they're talking about. If you want to grab what I consider to be the optimal training system in order to take these overarching general principles and actually apply them in a structured way so that you can gain muscle as efficiently as possible, then make sure to check out my complete body transformation blueprint program over at quiz.seannell.com. I'll link it up here as well as down in the description box. This is not just a step-by-step training program with everything mapped out in detail, but it also includes everything that you need to know on the nutrition side of things as well, without any of the typical hype and gimmicks that you find everywhere else. On the supplementation side of things, you can also visit realscienceathletics.com to check out my research-backed, no BS supplements that I personally formulated to help fully streamline your program and maximize your muscle building and fat burning results. And you can use coupon code YouTube15 to save 15% off your entire first order. You can follow me over on Instagram for more tips and updates. And as always, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe below if you haven't already in order to stay up to date on future videos. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.